Welcome to the Spirit RX podcast, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Healing. In this place, two healers come together, each walking a different path, yet bound by a common purpose. Dr. Luke, a quantum chiropractor, and Dr. Hummel, a naturopathic doctor. These two practitioners have dedicated themselves to a vital quest to unite the timeless remedies passed down through the ages with the powerful discoveries of modern medical science. For they understand what many have forgotten, that true healing honors both tradition and innovation. Should you wish to learn more of their stories, their practices, or how to walk this path with them, you will find that knowledge in the link below. And now, let the healing wisdom begin.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Spirit RX Podcast, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Healing. I'm Dr. Luke, quantum chiropractor, and this is Dr. Michael, naturopath extraordinaire.
And today we have the illustrious, glorious Dr. Todd Cameron with us, naturopath extraordinaire by infinite. So he is here to talk to us today about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And we're going to really dive into your expertise there. But just to get started, tell us a little about yourself and what led you to your expertise in that area.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say, Dr. Hummel, as you well know, is that I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and this is what I tell my patients, because on the second visit, they think I'm a really smart guy. And I say, okay, this is the reality. I picked my mentors very carefully when I got out of med school and going into residency. I picked my mentors that were not stuck in academia. So I call my patients the kids, my mentor is the chocolate milk, and I'm just the straw. So they just can suck up as much chocolate milk as they want through me, because what I'm doing is I'm mentoring them from my mentors mentoring me. But I think where you want me to go with this, if I'm not mistaken, is like, how did I get into doing so many bioidentical hormone things? And it was in the latter 90s, a very, very famous doctor from Belgium, his whole family is famous, Terry Hertog is his name. I don't even know if he's still around. But the Hertog family in Northern Europe are just illustrious, to use your words. So he was doing a speaking tour around the United States talking about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And he happened to come to Salt Lake, and I happened to go listen to him for 2-3 hours. And it just lit a fire underneath me. And so I knew I was going to have to learn as much as I possibly could about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. So slowly over the years, as I could afford it, I started studying, and I call them camps. There's all these camps, like there's American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, there's Life Extension Foundation, there's Professional Compounding Centers of America, there's even Suzanne Summers' group. And then in 2003, I'm going to grab a book. In 2003, I met Dr. Neil Rouzier. We don't look like that anymore because we're old, but he has 4 levels of education, Dr. Rouzier does, and he teaches through World Link Medical, and I know all those people, and I've been going to their seminars since 2003, but by 10:30 on Friday, his seminars are 2.5 days, Friday, Saturday, and half a Sunday, so you can catch a plane and head home. But by 10:30, the first break, I called Jenny and I just said, I found my camp. Nobody I have ever learned from ever has unpacked the scientific literature like Dr. Rouzier. Nobody. And I've studied with those camps. So I know I've experienced how they teach in the other camps. So that's fully a third of my practice, if not more, is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and thyroid stuff.
Yeah, I still use pretty much everything you taught me. That's the truth. But I still use that thyroid explanation.
Nomegraph.
Beautiful. Yeah, the little gas gauge approach.
Yeah, the gas gauge came from Dr. Jim Paoletti, who's a farm D that works with David Zava at ZRT Labs up in Beaverton, Oregon. And he unpacked that in 10 minutes to me over 25 years ago. And it's it's the most accurate way. If I can find a better way of doing it, I will, but I can't. It's the best way I've ever found.
That's amazing.
Well, let's jump into another question. If our endocrine system is a complex orchestra, hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are the star musicians. In your experience, which instrument most often starts playing out of tune first? And what's the sound it might make in someone's life that might bring them to you?
It's actually T3, you guys. It's thyroid, and then testosterone.
Okay.
And I can speak to the statistics about that if you want me to, but it's basically, the most common complaint is fatigue. And fatigue is most commonly a reduction in a proper production and conversion from free T4 from our thyroid to free T3, because free T3 is the biologically active form. The body knows that, so the body has to convert it. And a lot of people don't convert well. They overconvert to reverse T3, which is something that you should probably do a podcast on, Dr. Hummel, because not many people run it. And it's super important to run, as you know. But that's to kind of give it to you in the past 3.5 to 4 years, the number of new patients that we've had at our clinic that have had what I would consider a healthy amount of free testosterone, 5 people. Everybody else has been low. And thyroid for a healthy amount of free T3, 2 people out of hundreds. And those are the 2 entities that go south on you. And if you guys want to do this after the podcast, you can do another podcast. There's a really incredible website called testosteronedecline.com. And it has, these scientists have been studying testosterone decline all over the world for years. And it's funny, Uzbekistan has the highest testosterone in the world, and there's a little place in the Czech Republic that's the lowest, and the United States is about in the middle. So, but everybody's low. Like, it is a pandemic. It is an actual pandemic, testosterone decline. The main reason is chemicals in our environment. That's the main reason. But so those are the 2 instruments that are going to start going south on you. And the sounds like fatigue, lethargy, low libido. I would say the strongest 2 symptoms would be lethargy and fatigue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I totally agree. And I think maybe next season we'll get you back on. We'll go into some more depth on like reverse T3 and some of these other things, if we can't touch on it today. But sort of a base thing that I think a lot of people really would like to understand better. And I know I've explained, I know you explained it a lot, is understanding what this bioidentical sort of term means. And we wrote a little question where if I get my hormones derived from a yam, does that mean I'm going to start craving sweet potato? So the question is that bioidentical? What is that term? What are we referring to when we say bioidentical?
Yeah, that's a good question, because these 2 words come up all the time: synthetic and synthesized. So the term bioidentical, people overthink it. Every hormone that is made in a lab, it can either be reconstructed into a human bioidentical form like testosterone, progesterone, estradiol, and DHEA, or it can be constructed into a patentable form for big pharma like testosterone cypionate, medroxyprogesterone, ethinyl estradiol, etc. Those do not exist in nature. So you can go to the lab, you can take the steroid molecule from the wild yam, but actually it comes from, in the United States, last time I checked, the United States is still the leading producer of soybeans in the world. And one of the reasons for that, I used to live in Idaho, very close to the seed potato capital of the world, which is Ashton, Idaho, right there on the Snake River. And they sell more seed potatoes per capita than I think anybody on the planet. And they need to fix nitrogen in their soil. And so they'll do that a couple of different ways with a couple of different plants. But they'll plant a whole bunch of soy, and they don't even market the soy. They just plow it under. They let the field lie fallow and plow it under, and it fixes the nitrogen in the store, and their next crop is better. But so you can take soy and extract, or yam or other plants, and you can extract the steroid backbone. And people kind of freak out when I use the word soy because it's like, oh, isn't there soy protein in there then? No, there is not. This is a very exacting process. These chemists know what they're doing. The labs are, I mean, they've been doing this for years, and it's not difficult to reconstruct, take the steroid backbone, which has 4 carbon rings, and then simply recreate that which we produce. And so if you were to take testosterone that's in your body right now, and you were to take testosterone from a supplement, you would go to a liquid chromatographer or a gas chromatograph, and you would have exactly the same signature. So people call them natural hormones. And I think I probably ruined you, Dr. Michael, because I said, let's say human bioidentical, because that's exactly what it is. It's synthesized in a lab, but it is not synthetic, meaning that it's synthesized into a hormone that actually exists in nature. It exists in our bodies, and it's exactly the same. So the other form, the synthetic form, we'll take just an example is those ones I just rattled off, testosterone cypionate, ethinyl estradiol. We don't have long-term studies on these. We just don't. And we'll talk about the Women's Health Initiative, I think, in a minute. But it's testosterone cypionate is the injectable form. There's a couple of different forms of injectable testosterone that guys seem to really like. The problem is it's not actual testosterone. It's not human bioidentical testosterone. So we don't know 30, 40 years from now what's it doing. We don't know. We just don't have the data. We know about testosterone. We got plenty of data on that going in men going before 1940. But in cypionate and hexanate and these other injectables, no, we don't. So that's the difference. And if people feel more comfortable calling them natural hormones, that's because it's more touchy-feely. But it's literally you are synthesizing it in a lab, but you're synthesizing it into exactly what's already inside of you.
I think that's an important distinction.
Huge. Yeah, for sure. So now this next question, I call you the hormone detective. That's when I refer to Todd Cameron, I say, well, you got to go see the hormone detective. So beyond the usual suspects like hot flashes or low libido, what are some, I guess, subtle clues that you see that a patient's hormones are off kilter? And
how would you go about testing that?
So there are so many symptoms of hormone depletion. You touched on like low libido, obviously, is a drop in testosterone. A drop in estradiol can, women begin to look older, their skin begins to dry out, their vaginal tissue begins to dry out, and progesterone decline ends up, even though estradiol and progesterone are both low, a woman, regardless of age, whose progesterone is in a relationship with estradiol, but it's lower, they're walking around with the 7 dwarves of PMS, grumpy, weepy, bitchy, moany, maybe a little breast tenderness, nipple, and they're just not happy. And and that's because the estrogens, estradiol, is the strongest of the 3 estrogens, and it is excitatory to all the nervous systems. So if you're estrogen dominant in your central nervous system, you're going to be the grumpy, weepy, bitchy, moany person. If it's in your gastrointestinal system, the mesenteric system in the gut, you're going to be gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, IBS symptoms. But it's all PMS. It's all coming from PMS. And this can happen to young women that have quote unquote normal amounts of estradiol and progesterone. Dr. Hummel will tell you, Dr. Luke, I just don't study progesterone and estradiol in the blood of young women that are not postmenopausal or I mean, there's caveats to that for sure, but mostly the numbers are not actionable. And so what I'm asking my patient to do is spend extra money and blood to give me information that I can't use in the first place. But if I ask them, are you grumpy? Are you weepy? And they go, well, yeah. And I say, here's your progesterone. And we'll give them a progesterone troche and they use it as they need to. Or if they're PMSing all the time, I put them on a 25/5 protocol. They're on it for 25 days and they're off for 5 so they can slough their endometrium. And I mean, I do that all the time because it's so prevalent. Erectile dysfunction is a not so subtle sign of testosterone dropping. But when testosterone's decline too, it affects the mood of both men and women because androgens, DHEA being an androgen, and DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, is a precursor to all of the hormones. It's just over the counter. It's not a scheduled medication like testosterone. But all 4 of those, as they decline, one of the first things that happen is the mood changes. Your mood just changes. You're just not as happy. You may not be grumpy or weepy, but your happy meter is it's heading towards lethargic. And a woman postmenopausally, of course, where everything is dropped, they're going to have a lot more severe symptoms. And you guys see that every day in your practice. And, those women, they need help to become, and your listeners should understand this basic concept. What we're actually trying to do, doctors like Dr. Hummel and myself, is make you biologically younger, because a lot of people will say, well, I just want to age naturally. I don't want to use any chemicals. Right. And it's like, well, what's more natural than testosterone? What's more natural than estradiol? What's more natural than progesterone and DHEA? They're just exactly what you had when you were 23 to 25 years old, but now you just don't have very much of it. And so we can change that. And so every single solitary cell in your body, because it isn't just our genitalia, it's not just our central nervous system, there are lots and lots and lots of different cells in our body that have receptor sites to all these hormones. And once you replace them, you're younger biologically. You are now younger biologically, and a younger person is less likely to have inflammation, less likely to be grumpy, less likely to be unhappy and weepy. And, of course, everybody loves to hear that their patients' intimacy is improved. That's always wonderful to hear. And what Dr. Hummel and I do, and this is in my world, this is a very important distinction, because we're going to talk about pellets and injections in a minute. But when you take a person who has not been on hormones, and let's just use a postmenopausal woman, for example, and you just give them what you think they need in terms of concentration, you can blow those cells right out of the water, because those cells have grown a whole lot more receptor sites. So if you want to just put that fire out with gasoline, go ahead and just give them a big old shot of testosterone cypionate and stand back and watch what happens. It can be chaotic in the home. It can be chaotic for relationships. It can be chaotic for children in the home. It's just not a good idea. You can't adjust it. Once it's in there, it's in there. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones calls, my nipples are killing me. What do I do? And they say, well, just put tape over it and wait a month. It's like, is that the way you want to roll? No. Dr. Hummel and I, we start low and go slow. And we bring them up slowly so that those cells can readjust the number of receptor sites. And when they finally get to the point where they were when they were about 25, give or take, they're a lot healthier. They're a whole lot healthier in all those organs, glands, and tissues.
For a long time, hormone replacement therapy was cast as kind of a villain in the medical world, largely thanks to different studies, especially the Women's Health
Initiative trial, and the HERS trial, and the PEPI trial, electron prevention trial.
Yeah.
But the icing on the cake was the Women's Health Initiative trial.
How have things shifted? Give us a little background on that first, so that our audience members know even what we're referring to, but also then how have things shifted more positively?
So the Women's Health Initiative trial there's been a bunch of trials that have been funded by Big Pharma. The HERS trial, the PEPI trial, there's 2 other ones. But the Women's Health Initiative trial is infamous for the following reasons. And there's more than, we could take the rest of the time and talk about this. So I'm gonna soundbite this.
Yes.
The head investigators of the Women's Health Initiative trial, from my literature search, actually cost a lot of money and went on for quite a while. And it was abruptly stopped by the head investigators in 2002. What they did, they didn't do a peer-reviewed anything. They just went to mainstream media and they said, we need to get this data out because this is scary stuff. And so mainstream media projected this information. So the head investigator said we had to stop the trial because there was three legs of the trial: the control group, the estrogen group, and the progesterone estrogen group. Okay. They stopped the trial based on they reported, it's untrue, but they reported a 26% risk of breast cancer in the estrogen progesterone trial, which is simply not true. Dr. Rouzier talks all about this in seminar. We go through the Women's Health Industry trial and we just dissect it. So it was very unfortunate, though, because, and I lived through this, but I just turned 70 this year. And when I have postmenopausal women that aren't patients of mine and they come in, I will say, do you remember when all of a sudden all the women in the country got scared of hormone replacement therapy and the doctors held up the cross and said, liability, liability, no way, I'm not going there. And what we ended up seeing after they stopped the trial, well, let me back up. So there were enough women in the United States doing human bioidentical hormone replacement therapy then that, and I could get the numbers wrong, but I think in between 150 and 200,000 women abruptly stopped their hormones. Now that could be an incorrect stat, but I'm trying to remember what Neil says in class. Anyway, what happened afterwards in the ensuing years was a dramatic increase in dementia, heart attacks, strokes, hip fractures, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Those are the 6 pillars of why we do what we do in the first place: brain, heart, vessels, bones, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. And we saw an increase in all of that. And so to speak to how things are actually getting better is women hated that.
Of course.
Women were feeling good and suddenly they were not, and they were aging quickly. And so they went looking for alternatives, okay? And their daughters after them went to look for alternatives. And then they found people like Dr. Hummel and I, who have studied, because the one thing that especially this mentor of mine, Dr. Neil, he will look you in the eyes as a new doc coming in class number 1, and he will say, basically in his own words, he's going to say, you're not a hormone doc, but I'm going to make you one. And then he will say, any doctor in any specialty, endocrinology, gynecology, family practice, internal medicine, unless they have made a concerted study on sex hormones, they are not a hormone doc. They think they are, but they're not, because they don't know what the scientific literature says. So that's why I thank my mentors every day, because through my mentors, I can coach aging men, post-andropausal men, aging women, postmenopausal women, about what the science is actually saying and the benefit of doing the hormone replacement therapy versus avoiding it. Just to put it into perspective in terms of how standard of care can be. So Dr. Michael Hummel can tell you, Dr. Luke, and I could even show you my old ID. I found it during the move. When I was in my 30s, I was an ICU nurse at Primary Children's Hospital. I was a pediatric intensive care nurse.
Okay.
And so standard of care always made sense to me when it came to my EMT work, wilderness medicine, because I got certified in that too. And most of the stuff they do in ERs and ICU makes a lot of sense to me. Some doesn't, but most does, okay? But when you get out of that and you get into mainstream medicine, there's really no prevention. It's not preventive. And
Right.
so the standard of cares get to be really crazy. I'm going to share 2 standards of care with you right now to prove my point. Many years ago, this number 300 from total testosterone, I measured both total testosterone and unbound or free testosterone in my patients, at least at first. And then after a while, I forget about the total. But I do them both first for reasons that I don't want to bore your listeners with. So we asked Neil during one of our seminars, where's this 300 number coming from? And so Neil did a very deep dive into the literature. And the next seminar we were all in, he goes, the urologists just pulled it out of their hat. There's nowhere in the scientific literature. There probably is now because it's worked its way into standard of care, but there's no scientific background at all to the number 300 picograms per mil of frickin' total testosterone. They just pulled it out of their hat. But somehow, because they're the experts, right? Somehow consensus bias took over, and now it's kind of in standard of care in all, in family practice. You go to your primary health provider and say, dude, you got to check my testosterone. I'm just, like I don't have any more sex drive. I'm lethargic. My muscles are going flaccid. And the doctor does a total testosterone, doesn't do a free testosterone, and it's 350, 400, and he says, you're fine. No problem. And it's like, wait a minute. First of all, you didn't do his free testosterone, so you don't know. And number two, what is it about above 300? Show me where in the scientific literature, show me
That matters. Yeah.
that matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this arbitrary number, but because of consensus bias in medicine, it's going to leak its way. It's going to just permeate its way into standard of care, which sucks. It's horrible.
Well, so I think that covers a lot of the questions we were
Yeah.
going to ask. I'm curious about understanding the difference because you said you were going to go over this, and I think it's really important. Pellets, creams, patches, there's a lot of different delivery options out there. And I think it'd be helpful for our audience to just understand like what some of the risks and benefits are with the different delivery
Okay,
options.
so full transparency here. This is the way I do things based on the way Neil taught me to do things. But I've done other ways, and the ways that I do, I feel are the best. So in testosterone, in both men and women, I use a clicker with some cream in it. Why? Number one, you can take them up slowly over about a month and downregulate the receptor sites, okay? And then when you get to 2 clicks twice daily, or a half a mil twice daily, whether you're using a pump or a clicker, doesn't matter. Then you can redraw the blood, and we can go into why blood and not saliva and urine. But it emulates, when you put it on your skin, the testosterone, it comes up rather slowly and stays up for a while and then kind of decreases slowly. And then you do it again at night and the same thing happens. So we know that we can't make somebody 25-year-old. We understand that. But we can emulate that as closely as we can. And a cream with testosterone is the best way to do that. With progesterone and estradiol, it's completely different. Progesterone, I use as a capsule at night. I use immediate release, not extended release, because oral form of progesterone taken at night in a postmenopausal woman will help her stay in the deeper reaches of sleep, because the metabolites, as it goes through the liver, the first pass effect before it gets into the bloodstream and goes to your central nervous system and wherever else, it's going to hold you into stage 4 sleep longer, and that woman will then produce more growth hormone. And growth hormone, to us, we're all grown up, we're not growing anymore, so growth hormone is a repair hormone. So she's going to repair better, and it's very protective. Estradiol, I know that there's a lot of women that prefer the patches because it's easy. And I use a lot of vaginal applications at first with a postmenopausal woman if they are suffering from dyspareunia and vaginal atrophy, then I will do a suppository or a vag cream until the tissue is healthier, and then I'll switch them over to an oral form. Now, the oral form is very controversial because of studies like the Women's Health Initiative and others, which say, well, hey, look, the oral form of estradiol, you have a high, if you're postmenopausal, you have a statistically significant risk of clot formation and stroke. So let's examine that. They're right. They're absolutely correct. There is exactly 1%, a 1% increase in risk in a postmenopausal woman taking oral estradiol for the first calendar year only if you are obese and you smoke. But they never say that. They just read, oh, the Women's Health said stroke, so you can't take estradiol orally. And it's like, you know what? Have you looked at the literature? It's only estradiol orally which reduces cardiovascular risk. The transdermal doesn't. The troches, the patches, the creams, it'll help your brain, it'll help your central nervous system, it'll help your bones, but it's not going to do much for your cardiovascular system. And what is the leading cause of death in the United States in both men and women? Has been, is, and will be heart attack. By far, heart attack is way above stroke, way above cancer, which is too high in our country for sure, but it's way above that. So why would I not use oral estradiol? Sure, if a woman is morbidly obese, I'll start her on a cream or a patch for 1 calendar year. Then I'll swap her over to oral. Because that's what the scientific literature said. 1 calendar year, but only if you're obese and you smoke.
Very, very interesting.
Some people view the hormone replacement therapy as a magical anti-aging bullet that will restore their 25-year-old body energy libido overnight. Let's manage some expectations. What's the single most incredible life-changing benefit that you see that's realistic? And then likewise, also tell us what you cannot do, no matter how much a person might wish it.
So if I understand the first part of the question, one of the most interesting things, I was just talking to a patient, she and her partner were here yesterday, and I have a nurse practitioner that is following me once a week. Anyway, and so I'm saying, like, for example, in the hypothyroidism, the tired in the morning, tired in the afternoon, general sense of fatigue, lethargy, why did I walk in this room? Where did I put my keys? Where did I park my car? What does that paragraph say? And how fatigued and ER and stuff like that, and with testosterone too. And she goes, well, that doesn't really describe me. And so what I said was, one of the things I love the most about my work is how people will come back to me after they've been doing this for a couple of months and say, I had no idea how good I could feel. I had no idea I could feel this good. I had no idea that my muscle strength would come back. I had no idea that I'd be happy again. I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no frame of reference of how much I've changed over the years and how wonderful it is to be back. And so it's all of that. What people, of course, but the very first thing people are going to sense is their libido. That's just human. They're going to sense their libido come up. But over time, they're happier. Their recovery time, from the gym or a long hike or whatever, a bike ride is like way less. But as they begin to perceive these changes, some of them can be just as subtle, and then some of them can be dramatic. But then they have their frame of reference back, and they look back in time, and they said, I had no idea that I was not feeling as good as I could. I had no idea that, where I actually was, because they've been there for half a lifetime, and they've lost their frame of reference when they were 25 years old, and they're 65 now. I mean, that's a lot of life, water under the bridge to let you kind of forget. It's kind of like when women decide to have another baby, and we as men go, don't you remember transition and how hard you had to push and how much pain you were in? And they're wired to forget all about that because they want another kid. And it's like, I'm sure glad you guys are doing this and not us, because we would be extinct. Because I'm not putting up with that amount of pain. It's like, I've had a kidney stone, dude. No, just cap me now and put me out of my misery. So it's
Well, let's say that there's a patient who's maybe even just listening to this podcast, and they've hearing about this, and they're kind of on the fence, and then now they're like, well, this really promises a lot. I'm starting to lean in a little bit more, but I'm hesitant to go all the way. How long am I going to have to be on this? Am I going to have to be on this replacement therapy for the rest of my life?
the rest of your
Are
life.
there some harmful effects of that? Help someone that might be on the fence to know if this is the right thing for them.
Sure. Basically, what I say to everybody is the same thing. They're really, the only downside to this is, if here's a short version of a long story. Are you guys old enough to remember Lyle Alzado? The
Yeah.
name? Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
Lyle Alzado was a bad dude. And he was a linebacker for the Oakland Raiders when I was growing up, and everybody was afraid of this guy because he was just an animal. After he got out of the NFL, he found Christianity, he became a Christian, and in his documentary, he looked right at the camera and said, "You guys, I was a phony. I was shooting up before games and at halftime." testosterone. So if you're doing way, way, way too much testosterone, you're going to destroy your heart. But I don't let any of my patients get anywhere close to that, because if this was the scale, if your testosterone is down here, you're at risk of cardiovascular disease. If you're way up here, you're at risk of cardiovascular disease. So you want to be somewhere in the optimum. But the optimum, to be quite frank, is above normal range for thyroid and testosterone. And that's true with estradiol and progesterone as well. So I teach my patients, I teach them, I teach them, I teach them. But I also put they're responsible for their dietary lifestyle, their
Right.
activity, their right. So they're going to feel more like moving when their thyroid and their testosterone are optimal. They're going to feel more like getting back out there and hiking or getting on their bike again or doing what they used to love to do. Because part of this whole aging thing with the dropping of the hormones, it creates like I'm a climber. And when I realized that I had to start asking my provider to give me testosterone, is I just didn't care if I was going climbing or not. And it hit me one day and I'm just like, wait a minute, that's not me. And so I did my blood and sure enough, I was low. So I give them their choice. They don't have to do this, but this is really the only tried and true way, other than doing the IV work that Dr. Hummel and I do. I mean, I do IV ozone, IV, vitamin C, ozone, NAD, POC-X, and that can really change lives for sure. But if you want to maintain that, you've got to bring them up. So what I do is number one, I demystify it, but I also tell them how safe it is if you're doing it in the right way, so that they can come back to the middle and say, well, maybe I'll start with a little progesterone for my PMS-like symptoms and just see what happens. Fine. If that's your starting place, fine. And a lot of people will want to say, well, what about Tonkat Ali? And what about, these herbs that can raise my testosterone? And it's like, good luck with that. Maybe if you're 16 and you go to the gym every day and you take a whole bunch of, yeah. So I don't take the responsibility away from the person if that's what you're kind of looking at, Dr. Luke. That it's their responsibility to look after their own well-being, from dietary intake to whatever else. But once they understand not only how safe it is, but how beneficial it is, they start to shift.
Gotcha.
And I still get a fair number of, especially women, every once in a while a man, but women who will have heard or read or a doctor told them that estrogen causes cancer.
Right.
That's just simply not true. So once I help her understand where to go to learn about it, go listen to my mentor Neil talk about hormones and cancer on YouTube. That's easy. You can do it with your husband, and if you have questions, you can ask me questions.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, a lot of things come to my mind as you're talking about this, and one of them is just this. I think that there's sort of a propagated fear out there of being on a medication permanently. And I think that that fear is, I understand where people are coming from with that. You still got to eat food every day. You still got to go to the gym and exercise. There's things you have to supplement in your life and you have to have access to in order to feel your best. And so I have that conversation a lot with people. And I think it's very important to recognize as a whole that sometimes people are not making those hormones. And unfortunately, we live in an environment that sort of propagated that at this point. And replacing those gives you normalcy in your life. You would, when you're in your 30s and you don't have enough testosterone, that's a crazy, crazy thing that didn't used to happen. Anyway, that's me getting on my high horse about that. But I think it's a great, great thing that you're doing in terms of helping people get back on the horse and feel better and do things in their lives that ultimately help the lifestyle factors too. So let's talk a little bit about the worst advice from Dr. Google.
Yeah.
So let's say a listener's listening right now and they're feeling tired, foggy, uninspired, thinking, this might be me. I might be needing to go see Dr. Cameron and feel better. What is the first step that you recommend they take? And on the flip side, what is the absolutely most dangerous, misleading piece of advice that you constantly hear from Dr. Google?
I have a lot of patients that are using chat now.
Oh, yeah, that's right. ChatGPT. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
And
Yeah.
so they go to Google and they go to chat. And so I actually encourage that, but I give them
Give them the
references to
prompt.
look.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so a very good example of that is, dear chat, please summarize in 200 words or less Dr. Neil Rousier's How to Achieve Healthy Aging book. Okay. Now it
Love
will
it.
go in, AI will go in, it will retrieve
Use
data
him as a
from
source.
Neil.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's kind of how I tell them how to navigate that. Some of the worst stuff I hear is, and I hope I'm not too irreverent, but because of the Women's Health Initiative trial, the HERS trial, the PEPI trial, and because of the TOM trial and men, testosterone in older men, that was published in 2013 by the Journal of the American Medical Association, then there's the search engines will go and it will find these these more conventional, shall I say, from medical journals, and then you'll get more information from the Women's Health Initiative or more information from the TOM trial. And then that it feeds the fear of, ooh, hormones bad. And so the Googling, some of the worst stuff you can get is some of the conventional studies, depending on how you put your, what you put in the search bar, because they're going to be dominant in things like Journal of the American Medical Association. And so we're back to the same problem. We're back to the problem of a lot of the science that's been published out there that is readily available, found on PubMed or by AI, is unfortunately very misleading and not true and bad science. And that's some of the worst stuff you can get up. So it's basically the same thing we've been talking about. On the other hand, on the upside of that, you can go and say, hey, I've heard about this guy, Abraham Morgentaler, and he's a urologist out of Boston. I heard he and his androgen study group did a paper after the TOM study came out and said men over 50 should avoid testosterone because it increases cardiovascular risk. So Morgentaler, who's one of our great heroes for men's health in the United States, he's got a group of his research buddies. They call themselves the Androgen Study Group. I encourage anybody that's listening to the podcast to just go to their website, androgenstudygroup .org. I don't know. And you can see that when the TOM study came out, like you're on Dr. Google and you can see the TOM study and it's like scary. Oh my gosh, I'm a 45-year-old guy. I'm not going to do any testosterone. But then you can find Morgentaler's paper and it blows the TOM study out of the water. They pulled 213 studies. They did a meta-analysis, 213 studies, and they went all the way back to 1940. And out of the 213 studies, 209 of them said, no, men over 50 should do testosterone to avoid cardiovascular disease. So when you're on Dr. Google, you can
Right.
find both of those. So I'm okay with people Googling and chatting and doing all that. As a matter of fact, I encourage it, but you got to give them a direction to go. Drop a name, Dr. Morgentaler, Dr. Rousier, drop a book, drop a study, so they can go and find the information that is not going to mislead them and scare the crap out of them and make them so they don't want to do it. Because that's what really happens. And this is still happening less, but it still happens where, and I'm sure you guys have this, you have say a postmenopausal woman, she happens to go see her gynecologist and got scared and came back. I mean, this happened to me just a couple of months ago by a woman I've been treating for over 25 years.
Right.
Or 25 years. And she comes back and she goes, I know what you're going to say, but they scared me and I want you to talk me off the ledge. So she had gotten scared by her gynecologist, who rattled off a bunch of data, which was incorrect. And she stopped doing all of her hormones. And she came back to me like 3 months later. And I was just like, Mandy, you've known me for over 25 years. She goes, I know what you're going to say, but just tell me it again. Tell me it again. And so sit them down, calm them down, go over the basics again, let them understand where the reality is, and then they're back on board.
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about. And like this really hit me in the face. I'm a second career person in medicine. And I can remember in a class, an instructor said, oh, write this down. This is a board question that might show up on your national boards. And I don't even remember the topic, but they said the condition and the treatment, and then this is what you need to know. And then I raised my hand and said, well, hold on, that's not the current best practices treatment for that symptom. And the instructor said, I know that, but the questions on the test are so old, they haven't caught up to what's really happening. So you need to memorize both the right way to do it and this way because it's a test question. And if you want to pass your national boards and get your license, you've got to know that. So it like that kind of blew my mind, the lag that there can be between what's the current thing and what's the latest current thing. And you're absolutely right. There's so many people people in medicine are busy. And so how current are they staying? There's such an explosion of information and research and not everywhere. Sometimes we're just memorizing an old fact and we keep repeating that out and maybe it's not right. And so I challenge physicians to stay current and to ask good questions. But that kind of leads me to give us a couple of you've been mentioning a book. Give us some resources that like these are the best places that a listener might want to go to. Some books, some names, some websites. You've been sprinkling it in as we go, but just help us
Sure.
with that again.
I send almost all of my hormone patients to YouTube to because people don't necessarily want to sit down and read a book. So
Yes.
I have them photograph this book so they can, because his name's spelled kind of odd. And if they want to go buy the book, fine. Or just go and listen to his lectures. You can listen to a 10-minute lecture on YouTube, or you can listen to him for an hour and a half. And you can listen to him talk about,
Yeah, so
you know,
spell his name out because usually when you're holding up the book there, your fingers
my
covering his
hands.
name.
It's a Rouzieir.
Zier. Perfect. And this is like the guy.
Well, he's my guy. Yeah.
Okay.
He's like I said, I've
He's
studied
pretty
with
well
so many
known.
camps.
Yeah.
I've studied with so many camps that he's the guy that I trust the most based on the scientific
Okay.
literature. For men, I think it's a good thing to be aware of. Maybe they just want to read the abstract. But this paper by the Androgen Study Group, this paper was published by Mayo because Dr. Morgenthaler is an assistant professor in urology at Harvard, and I somewhat have connected to Mayo. So when they did their meta-analysis, which is called Testosterone Therapy and Cardiovascular Risk, Advances and Controversies, published by the Mayo Clinic, this is the study that was in response to the testosterone in older men study
Right.
published by the Journal of the American Medical Association. And in this study, that's where they pulled the 213 studies, and 209 of them are positive for men over 50, 40, and 50 to do testosterone. And only 4 studies were negative, and the TOM study is the 4th study, and it's cited in this paper. So when this paper was published by Mayo, all of a sudden you got the TOM study and this study going like this. But this is basically blown it out of the water. There's other kind of luminaries in the field. They may or may not do things exactly, but like women will have Kristen Northrup has written extensively on postmenopausal women and hormone replacement therapy. Oh boy, I mean, there's a whole bunch where I would have people start honestly, and then you can branch off because there's references in Neil's book or on YouTube listening to him. He'll depending on what he's talking about, he'll give references as well. And I have Michael's seen them. I've had each class that Neil teaches, there's 4 levels right now. And I've been through all of them since 2003. And I mean, the amount of data you go through in a 2.5-day seminar, and they're packed full of data that would make a patient's eyes roll back in their head,
Right.
So you don't want to overdo it kind of thing, right? So I think to start with that the TOM study was such a devastating study for men after 2013 that I think this testosterone therapy and cardiovascular risk advances and controversies from the Mayo is at least read the abstract. The abstract's only this long.
And what were you mentioned, I know in the past we talked about stopthethyroidmadness.com. Good one to kind of get people outside of the box with understanding thyroid.
Janie Bowthorpe's book and website, all one word, stopthethyroidmadness.com. A great resource to help people start thinking out of the box, because just touching on the problem, not going into detail, but the standard of care again is, well, let's pull the blood and run the thyroid stimulating hormone, and if it's within normal range, and every doctor screens that, and if it's within normal range, you just don't treat the patient. Well, I would say 90 to 95% of all my patients have all their thyroid hormones within normal range, but that doesn't make them optimal. So it's very misleading and Janie was aware of that. She had her own problems, and so she started this website and book. It's a great resource.
Cool. So, and then you mentioned the androgen study org group.
Well,
and what was the other one, the other website you mentioned?
It's called the
Testosterone
Androgen
something?
Study Group, I think .org, but maybe .com. And which other one did I mention?
You mentioned a testosterone something.
Oh, decline. That's an incredible,
Testosterone decline.
yeah, testosteronedecline.com, which is, I mean, all it takes is about 3 seconds looking at that website to understand what a problem we have in this world.
Gotcha.
Not even in just the United States, all
Yeah.
over the world, everywhere. And it's like, it's the chemicals. What are you going to do? I've got a patient that started a business some years ago, made some money, bought 82 acres on the Big Island in Hawaii, and started an organic vegetable farm. And he happens to be vegan, and he's considering himself very, very healthy. And about 10 years ago, he says, "Let's run my testosterone." And I said, "Okay, you're going to be low." And he says, "No, I'm not." I said, "Okay." So I pulled his blood, because he comes to Utah every once in a while, and showed him his results, and he was gobstruck. He was just like, "Wait, what?" And I said, "I know, dude. It's mostly because of chemicals." And he goes, "I'm an organic farmer living in Hawaii. I have the cleanest air on the planet, and I eat my own food that I grow." And I said, "Yeah, but you're human, and you're alive, and you're on the planet. So you're not going to get away from mercury coming from Chinese power plants, coal burning power plants. No matter where you are on the planet, you're going to breathe some of that stuff in. So what are you going to do?" I mean, people can do stuff in their homes. If they're building a new home, the off-gassing of the carpets and the silicone that keeps the windows in, all that stuff you can do something about, or put a water filter on or stuff like that. But I mean, you'd have to live in a bubble.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the best example I give is the Inuits. They had all of those issues with their hormones, right, affecting their fertility. And it was because basically the spray of these chemicals over crops was
And
basically being brought up into the atmosphere and dumped into the cold environment in their water, and they were eating the fish where it accumulated in their fat.
and
They're like,
and the seals and the walruses, and it was Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, the Dakotas. Yeah.
it's eye-opening. So I guess, this is coming to the end of our podcast today. If there was one thing you would want to leave our listeners with, one good piece of advice, something to sort of wrap up, what would that be?
Well, if you're going to hold my feet to the flame, then I think I've talked enough about sex hormones. But do you remember? No, you were not with me in 2016. That was Aaron and Jeanette. So in 2016, and I run on thyroid, I run a free T3, a free T4, and a reverse T3 on everybody. And prior to 2016, very seldom would I see somebody over converting to reverse T3 because of stress. I wouldn't see it very often, keeping in mind that reverse T3 blocks T3, and so the symptoms are all the same of hypothyroidism. So the one thing I'd leave you guys with is, since 2016, there's an event that happened in 2016. It took me 2.5 weeks to figure this out. In 1 week, I mean, I would see in the past, I would see one, maybe 2 patients a month that were overconverting to reverse T3. And we found 6 patients one week, 6 by the end of the week. And that was weird, but what do you do? And by the end of the second week, 10 new patients overconverting to reverse T3. So Monday morning, third weekend, I'm on the phone with LabCorp asking, what have you done with the test? So I get up to the MD PhD that runs the place, and he could tell that I wasn't having it. I was convinced that something was wrong with their test. They had changed something. And he said to me, and I'll never forget, he said, I cannot tell you why this is happening, but I can assure you that it's not on our side. And so I said, thank you very much. And I hung up, and he'd been on speakerphone, and my 2 residents were listening to this conversation. And I looked at him and I just shook my head and said, BS, basically. And that was Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the 4th new patient that week. And I started thinking back, okay, so last week and the week before, what's going on? And it struck me. It started the first week of the presidential campaign in 2016. And from then till now, over 90% of my new patients are overconverting to reverse T3 because of stress.
Really, since that time, we've seen tremendous divisiveness.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And then sprinkle in a little COVID.
Sprinkle a little COVID on there, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Not to mention all the, the wars and the. So what my quote unquote counsel is, take stock of, gain a little altitude of your life and look around at the toxic relationships that you don't necessarily need to foster. Now's the time to make changes that will reduce the load of stress, not only in us, but it's the field effect. And so if we can get ourselves under control, then the world has a better chance of getting itself under control.
Right.
And we're certainly not there now. But I have hope that we can,
turn things around.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful advice. Well, Todd, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show, and
Hey,
thank
thanks.
you everyone for joining us. And then I'm hoping, down the road, we'll do another one. We'll dive into some other fun, enjoyable topic, but it's been a pleasure.
Let's do it. Thanks, guys.